All right, ready to go deep. Today, we're taking a closer look at Jane Eyre.
A classic, for sure.
But we're going beyond the romance to uncover all the fascinating social commentary in this book. And believe me, there's a lot to unpack.
It's true. It's amazing how a book written in 1847 can still resonate today.
I know, right? So we all know the basic plot. Orphan Jane, harsh boarding school, life as a governess.
Right.
But what really got me thinking was the whole governess thing. Like, what was that life really like back then?
Yeah, it's not something you really think about, is it?
Not really.
Imagine being an educated woman in Victorian England. Your options, well, they were limited.
For sure.
Being a governess was seen as respectable. You could use your education. But it was this weird, precarious position.
How so?
They were kind of stuck in between, you know?
Yeah.
Not really servants, but definitely not family.
I see, like stuck in this awkward middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. They had all this responsibility, educating the children, making sure they upheld the family's social standing, all while trying to navigate these, like, unspoken social roles.
Oh, I bet. One wrong move and...
Exactly. They could be dismissed, lose their jobs, their reputations ruined.
Wow. Talk about stressful. It's no wonder Jane is always on edge, especially around Rochester.
Oh, absolutely. And Brontë really shows how that power dynamic plays out. You see it when Jane's interacting with Rochester's wealthy friends, you know?
Yeah.
She's always aware of her place, always kind of on the outside looking in.
Trying to prove herself.
Exactly.
But never quite feeling good enough.
Right. And this whole idea of vulnerability, of being at the mercy of others, it becomes even more obvious when you look at Jane's time at Lowood.
Oh, yeah. Lowood. That place was grim.
Brutal.
And to think that Charlotte Brontë drew on her own experiences for that.
It's tragic, really. Bronte's sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, they died young.
Oh, no.
From tuberculosis, likely contracted at their school. Just like Helen Burns.
Wow, so this really wasn't just fiction.
No. She saw it all firsthand. The harsh conditions, the neglect, the terrible things that happen as a result.
And she didn't hold back with Mr. Brocklehurst.
No, he's believed to be based on a real person, too.
Really?
Brontë uses Jane to show us the hypocrisy, the abuse, this whole system that allowed places like that to exist.
It really makes you think. Mm-hmm. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of it all.
I know, right?
But there's this whole other layer of social critique.
Absolutely.
It's what makes Jane Eyre more than just a love story. It's a powerful commentary on social injustice.
Couldn't agree more.
It's amazing how Brontë takes these really specific experiences,
Yeah.
like being a governess going through this awful school,
Right.
and uses them to talk about these bigger social issues.
Yeah.
And she really doesn't hold back, especially with Bertha Mason.
Oh, Bertha, such a fascinating character.
She's usually just called the Mad Woman.
Right.
But I feel like there's so much more to her than that.
Oh, for sure. To really get Bertha, you have to understand the anxieties of the time, what she represented to people back then.
Okay, so what did she represent?
Well, think about how she's described in the book, right? Wild, uncontrollable, locked away in the attic.
Yeah, it's pretty clear she's not supposed to be a positive figure.
No, not at all. She embodies all these fears about women, especially women's sexuality, having desires and agency, having control.
And especially outside of marriage, I'm guessing?
Exactly. A woman expressing her desires, not allowed, definitely not back then.
So she's locked away to control her, but also to control what she represents.
You got it. But it gets even more complicated when you remember who Bertha is.
A woman who was already married to Rochester.
Yes, but also she's a Creole woman from Jamaica living in England during the time of the British Empire, you know, colonialism.
So it's not just about gender, it's about race, too.
Exactly. Brontë connects those anxieties about women to those anxieties about race and colonialism.
She's carrying so much symbolic weight on her shoulders. All those fears about women, about people from outside their culture. Makes you think about how even today,
Oh, absolutely.
we are still dealing with these issues, these judgments and stereotypes.
It's true. But that's what makes Brontë so insightful. She was willing to look at these uncomfortable parts of society, of ourselves.
For sure. So we have Jane dealing with all this system that keeps trying to control her, to limit her. And then she gets away from it all.
Flees Thornfield.
Right, and meets the Rivers family. Talk about a change in fortune.
Right. And it's not just dumb luck. Turns out, surprise, they're related.
I love that part. Suddenly, she's not alone anymore. She has this whole family she never knew about.
Yeah, and an inheritance, too, don't forget.
Oh, yeah, that totally changes things for Jane.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that money, or the lack of it, determines so much back then, especially for women.
So even with her intelligence, her spirit, She's still stuck in this system that limits her choices. But then she gets this freedom.
That inheritance, even though it's fictional, highlights how important money was for women.
And it allows Brontë to give us this moment where it seems like finally Jane has real control over her own life. Which brings us to the biggest question, the ending everyone wants to talk about. So Jane's independent now. She has her inheritance. She could do anything, go anywhere.
Right, a whole new life.
But she goes back to Rochester.
Peter, I married him.
I swear those words have launched 1,000 book clubs.
At least.
But seriously, what do you make of that ending? Is it a happy ending? Is it a victory for Jane?
It's complicated. I mean, on the one hand, they love each other, right? And she gets to be with him.
That's what everyone wants for her, to be with Rochester.
Right. But there's still this power imbalance between them, even after everything. He's still Mr. Rochester.
And he's still her former employer.
Exactly. And Jane, even with money, she can't just erase her past, her experiences.
It's like Brontë wants us to question everything. Right when you think it's a typical love story, she throws in these challenges.
Oh, for sure. And we can't forget about Bertha. Her death, it's convenient for Jane and Rochester, isn't it?
Little too convenient.
It makes you wonder about how women like Bertha fit into these stories, or if they even get to have their own stories told.
Yeah, it's definitely not your average love triangle.
Not at all.
But Jane does come back to Rochester on her own terms, right? She has her own money now.
Absolutely. This isn't a rescue. She's not dependent on him.
That's so important. She has a choice, and she chooses him. Which, again, makes you wonder, what does she really want?
Right. Is it just love? Or is it something else? Is she trying to find a way to make this system, this world that's always trying to control her, is she trying to make it work for her?
Such a good question.
Yeah.
Honestly, we could talk about Jane Eyre all day.
Oh, I know, right? So much to unpack.
There's just so much there. But I think that's what makes it such a great book, don't you think? It stays with you.
It really does. It makes you think about your own life, your own choices,
Yeah.
all the things you might not have considered before.
And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive.
Exactly. It's not just about the surface. It's about diving deeper.
Looking for those hidden meanings and connections. So, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Jane Eyre. Hopefully you've discovered some new ways of looking at this classic.
Remember, great books like Jane Eyre, they spark these conversations, these questions that stay with us. And that's a good thing.
Keep those conversations going, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.